We're at South by Southwest EDU with Waller-Bey. Can you start by telling us what you do? What is your role?
I do everything. But hi, I'm Waller-Bey. I am finishing my PhD in Sociology at the University of Michigan. So I like to say I am a writer, speaker, thinker, and storyteller.
All right, and so also as a former college admissions counselor, can you talk about the role that the essay plays in the admissions process? What are admissions counselors really looking for, and why do colleges need or consider this accounting of a student beyond their grades and resumes?
Great question. So fun fact, the majority of colleges in this country do not require a college admissions essay. So it's actually the more selective or highly rejective institutions that incorporate them, and they dominate, unfortunately, all of our discourse on higher education, which is why we often talk about it. So put that out there. The college personal essay is often, admissions officers want at least one opportunity to hear directly from the students, and it often is an opportunity for students to kind of complement their kind of quantitative, their grades and their test scores. So that's part of the reason why it's used. Now, what are they looking for? I hear a lot of different things. They often say authentic lived experiences. I mean, they want them to answer the question, which is first and foremost the most important thing. So it varies as far as what they're looking for. I've interviewed admissions officers who said that they're actually using it as a writing sample. So some of the least selective institutions that do require it might actually use it to make sure that students have a certain level of writing proficiency. So it varies as far as like its utilization, but it oftentimes is an opportunity to kind of complement the application and to hear directly from the students.
Also, you talked about how the essay is an opportunity for students to tell their story. Why do colleges care about that story?
Yes, that's a great question. So there's a number of reasons why colleges care about the stories. I mean, for the schools that practice holistic admissions, and that is schools who not only consider grades, test scores, letters of recommendation, they look at leadership, they look at background, they look at identity. They're using the essay to complement this full kind of academic profile. They're also building classes. So if you talk about you love environmental science and they just started an environmental science major, it actually allows them to say, okay, we have students who are interested in environmental science. Some schools use it to provide scholarships, right, for particular niche programs. If you talk about your love for Greek and you're one of 5 Greek students who are applying, that also helps as well. So there's various purposes of the college admissions essay. It's just, again, an opportunity for the students to talk directly from self to the admissions offices. And again, this is really only applicable to those universities that practice holistic admissions, because some schools require admissions essay, but they're not holistic. So that might be just a blip in their application. They might, skim. But for the schools who want that full picture, they're taking into account all these various pieces of the application.
And in just 2 or 3 sentences for our student audience who may not know, can you break down what affirmative action is and what the Supreme Court decided around affirmative action?
Woo, okay. He said, how many sentences? So affirmative action, at least in this latest iteration, is a policy that allows universities, so I'm thinking squarely in the higher ed context, allow universities to consider race in the application as they're evaluating academic profiles. Now, what this doesn't mean that you get an extra point in your application because you check a box that says you are Black or Hispanic or Latinx. That is actually unconstitutional. So it's not a quota. It doesn't mean they can set aside 12 spots for 12 Mexican students. That's unconstitutional. But what they're doing is consider it holistically a part of the larger application, right? So you can talk about being from, a low-income first-generation background from Newark, New Jersey, right? You can talk about being, a Black first-generation college student, and colleges just have that context as they're making their broader decision, right? So it was not the reason why students were getting pushed into university. So, and you said the most recent, yeah, so the most recent Supreme Court decision, the one happened in last June 2023, essentially ruled that race-conscious admissions practices were unconstitutional. And essentially that meant that practice of even considering race as it relates to this broader picture was deemed unconstitutional because it was it was discriminating against other students, particularly white and Asian students. So essentially, they ruled that it was creating like an unfair kind of advantage for other kind of minority or majoritarian kind of groups, which was part of the reason why that decision went to the Supreme Court. It was Asian American students and white students who said that they were being discriminated in Harvard and UNC's admissions practices. So I hope I answered that question.
Yep, absolutely. Okay. And I appreciate that as context for our next question. So what are colleges explicitly or indirectly telling students of color about the admissions essay post that latest Supreme Court's decision around affirmative action?
So you have some universities that, despite the guidance or the ruling, did not say you had to, eliminate all scholarships that for students of color. It didn't say you had to cancel any of your bridge or summer programs that support students of color. But unfortunately, some universities have leaned into that. So what you're hearing that universities are actually changing some of their admissions questions. So those supplements, those are the additional essay questions that are school specific. They are changing some of those questions to ask students explicitly about identity and background, because they're trying to circumvent the ruling where students can disclose and they can then kind of consider it. So you're seeing universities asking questions about identity, background, diversity, overcoming adversity narratives. They're starting to change their questions to try to solicit more of that information, again, because they're trying to figure out how can we figure out who is a racially minoritized student, who is first gen, who is low income, because of the Supreme Court ruling. And then I've heard students say that they feel like they can't or shouldn't now talk about their racial identity, but I have not read that any universities are doing that. I'm trying to recall. But you also have to think about the state level politics in some of our states here. So what happens in Michigan might look very different in Florida, might look very different in Kansas, which might look very differently in Massachusetts. So there's also some state level politics that are kind of impacting how certain universities are even thinking about racial diversity in the college application process.
And so in your work and also during your panel, you talk about, how these changes sort of already exacerbate the problem that a lot of students of color feel like they have to disclose personal traumas in their college admissions essay. So you also say that sometimes writing about trauma, it allows students to share that full and authentic story, but also students of color may feel pressure to write those essays because it's a story they're expected to tell. It fulfills stereotypes. So if I'm a student of color who has experienced trauma and is considering writing about it, what would your advice be? Should I not? How should I approach it?
Yeah, so the unpopular response is it depends. I don't think, as I said in my conversation earlier, all traumas are not created equally. I think some students use the essays as a diary to disclose very intimate personal details. I think in a lot of those cases, it's not the most appropriate place to do that. I would have a conversation about what they're trying to disclose and let them know that if they choose to disclose this, that it may not just be one person reading it. It might be a slew of people reading it, and wanting them to understand what it means to not only have one person versus two versus three, but 4 or 5, even maybe a peer, because some universities have admissions committees that other students are a part of. So I think it's more of the education about, what is this story is trying to convey, and is this the best type of story to tell to convey those certain types of values or traits or things that you're trying to highlight. So I just will want students to kind of take it seriously and think about what happens once you press submit, which I think that part of the conversation is often always left out. So I will never tell a student absolutely not, because I believe in agency, and I think students and anybody have a right to tell their story in their own words, in their own terms. But I want them to feel forced, and I don't want them to think it will put them at an advantage to do so. So that would be the conversation that I have with them.
So transitioning a little bit to your personal experience, so you shared that you're a first-generation college-going student.
I am a proud first-generation college student. Mm-hmm.
What advice do you wish you had received as a first-gen college student?
There were so many. I mean, I was fortunate at Georgetown. I had a lot of amazing mentors. I would say save your refund checks, because I got plenty of those, and I didn't have the financial literacy that I have now. What would I have a very kind of shoot your shot mentality now. I'm very kind of bold. I do a lot of things, like speak at South by Southwest by myself on the stage with a microphone, right, without notes. So I do those things like that, and I think I want more first-gen students to take the risk and do it afraid, as they like to say. Yeah, because I think it's easy to be discouraged and say, I don't have enough money, or my parents are not from this background, I'm not a legacy, I don't have this, these kind of resources that my peers have. But I'm like, you have everything you need already. So I think that is something that I would take advantage of. Like, you have everything you need, like apply anyway, like you're just as smart as those people. Yeah. And then lastly, see, I can be here all day because there's so much stuff, but just like, I wish, I do wish I would have taken advantage of just, there were so many opportunities that I encountered in undergrad, but again, I was like, is that for me? And I wish I would have just kind of leaned into it. Like, everything is for me, like, why wouldn't it be? So, yeah.
Can you share your best college experience, your best college memory?
Oh, best college experience, best college memory. I'm like, okay, the Drake concert that one time. We had floor seats. Oh, well, when I was at Georgetown in D.C. when President Obama got elected the second time. So when he got elected, we ran down to the White House and did like the electric slide. It was like us, the folks from Howard University, which is a HBCU, and it was beautiful. And we have photos celebrating, and that, to be a part of that, was historic and beautiful.
Oh, that's amazing. And our final question. So you are a PhD candidate in sociology at the University of Michigan.
Go Blue.
First, what is a sociology major, in case some of our students don't know?
You asking the hard-hitting questions. So sociology is a discipline that studies and examines people, institutions, organizations, networks, but it's really like an examination of our social processes, social systems. It is a social science, so we do conduct empirical research, so we do investigations and etc. And you can be qualitative, so that can be someone who interviews people, who observes people, but you can also be quantitative. So if you're interested in numbers, you like data sets, you can also conduct projects where you get to examine numbers as well to tell very important stories about the human experience.
And so can you tell us what led to your decision to pursue degrees after your undergrad and why students might consider doing the same?
Well, I said I always wanted to be Oprah with a PhD, but now I would say Oprah with less controversy with a PhD. I've always loved to tell stories, but I also thought that there was something very beautiful about my professors in college, who I thought were the smartest people I ever met, who had all of this knowledge and kind of information about these very relatively niche things, but they got paid to write and to read and to converse and be professors and to talk, and I love that. So that was important, and also contributing to the creation of knowledge, right? So when I think about the books we read and what informs the books we read, like your textbooks, that is information that they are distilling from text, and that historians and sociologists and psychologists have written, right? I think that's beautiful to be a part of the creation of knowledge, especially as a Black woman. And I'm just an overachiever as well. So those are some of the reasons why. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.